People say Roman education is the foundation of Western education, the origin of every modern school we have today. They're right, because the Roman education system profoundly influenced how the West organized teaching and learning for 2,000 years. But they forget to mention something important. The real purpose of Roman education was never to enlighten or spread knowledge to everyone. It was to rule, to create people capable of running an empire, and to exclude everyone who didn't belong to that class. This is the story of a system praised as great, but designed from the start to serve only a very small minority, in the civilization celebrated as the most brilliant in history, with its arenas, temples, and laws that the whole world studied and copied. What percentage of Romans do you think could read and write? 80%, 60%, or at least half the population? Not 80%, not 60%, not 50%. The actual number was far lower than most people imagine. According to historians like William Harris of Harvard, literacy rates in the Roman Empire only ranged from 10 to 20%, and in the 3rd century BC, when Rome was already a superpower capable of defeating Carthage, that rate was only 1 to 2%. 1 to 2% means that out of every 100 Romans, only 1 or 2 could read their own name on paper. But this wasn't a failure of the Roman education system. It wasn't a flaw or a mistake in how they organized their schools. This was its design. This was how the system was built from the beginning to function, and it worked perfectly for that purpose. Roman education was never created for everyone to learn. It was never meant to spread knowledge across the vast empire. It was created to produce rulers. And now let's see how that machine operated from the inside. The Roman education system was divided into 3 levels, each acting as a gate to filter out those without enough money or status. The first level was called ludus, literally meaning play, where children from age 7 learned reading, writing, and basic arithmetic on wax tablets. It sounds like a modern elementary school, but there was one crucial difference that most people don't mention when making comparisons. It wasn't a public school. There was no state funding. Families had to pay, and not every family had the money to pay. The teachers at this level were called literators, and they were paid 50 denarii per student per month, according to the price edict of 301. For comparison, a bushel of wheat cost 30 denarii at the time, meaning a teacher's salary could barely buy 2 bushels per student. The social status of literators was surprisingly low, lower than craftsmen, requiring no special qualifications to teach. In a civilization praised for valuing learning, the people actually teaching children to read were looked down upon and struggled to survive. But this was only the first gate, and most children would stop here, never passing through to the second gate. The second level was called grammaticus, for children aged 9 to 12, where they studied Greek and Latin literature and the art of rhetoric. Students would read Homer, Virgil, analyze poetry, practice writing, practice public speaking, all the skills needed for a public career. But to enter this level, families needed money, and the cost was much higher than ludus, because teachers here were paid 4 times more. Grammaticus teachers were paid 200 denarii per student per month, 4 times what literators earned, reflecting the clear hierarchy of society. This cost automatically excluded common children. That wasn't an unintended side effect, but how the system was designed to work. By this age, poor boys had to become apprentices to craftsmen or work the farms. They had no time to sit and read Homer's poetry. Girls, whether rich or poor, were mostly prepared for marriage, learning household management. They didn't need and weren't allowed to study rhetoric. The final level was called Rhetor, for young men aged 14 to 16, where they studied rhetoric, philosophy, and law. This was the final stage of formal Roman education, training those who would become lawyers, politicians, and leaders. Very few students reached this level. Only the richest and most powerful families could afford to educate their children this far, and this was the purpose from the start. Not mass education, but training a small, carefully selected ruling class. Quintilian was one of the most famous rhetoric teachers in Rome, and he was the first to receive a state salary for teaching. Emperor Vespasian appointed him to this position with a purpose clearly recorded in historical documents of that time. That purpose was to create an intelligent and responsible ruling class, not to educate ordinary people. Not education for all, but education for those who would run the empire, those born into the elite class. Cato the Elder, one of Rome's most influential statesmen, defined the ideal orator in a famous Latin phrase, vir bonus dicendi peritus, meaning a good man skilled in speaking. Not just the skill of speaking, but the morality of the ruling class. This wasn't just a definition of skill, it was a definition of a type of person, a person born and trained to lead others. Roman education didn't teach you to read, it taught you to rule, and if you weren't born into the right family, you weren't taught anything at all. The system worked perfectly for its purpose. But the strangest thing was who was actually teaching these aristocratic children. In 272 BC, the city of Tarentum in southern Italy fell to the Roman army after a long siege. Tarentum was a Greek city, located in what the Romans called Magna Graecia, Great Greece, where Greek culture flourished brilliantly. When Rome captured the city, thousands of Greeks were taken as slaves and transported to Rome to be sold to aristocratic families. Among those captured was a boy or young man named Andronicus, who would later completely transform Roman culture. Andronicus was sold to the Livius Salinator family, a powerful aristocratic household, and given a new name after his masters, Livius Andronicus. Because of his high education and fluency in reading and writing Greek, he was assigned to tutor the children in the Livius household. Stop and think about this for a second. The conquered was teaching the conqueror. A slave was teaching aristocratic children how to become leaders. And Livius Andronicus wasn't an exception. He was just one of thousands of Greeks captured and turned into tutors in Rome. According to historical sources, most private tutors in the Roman education system were slaves or freedmen of Greek origin. Those captured, sold, treated as property, with no citizenship, no freedom, were the ones transmitting knowledge to the ruling class. They taught aristocratic Roman children how to read Homer, how to write, how to speak before crowds, how to become rulers of the world. But Livius Andronicus didn't just teach. He did something no one expected and permanently changed Roman literary history. In 240 BC, he translated Homer's Odyssey from Greek into Latin using the native Saturnian meter. This was the first work of Latin literature in history, the first translation, and it was used as a textbook in Roman schools. That same year, he wrote and staged the first play in Latin for the Ludi Romani, Rome's greatest festival honoring Jupiter. A Greek slave, a captured and sold man, became the father of Roman literature and laid the foundation for the empire's entire educational system. The irony here is almost unbelievable. Rome copied nearly their entire education system from the people they conquered and enslaved. But there's an interesting detail. Rome left out two subjects that Greeks considered the most important in education: music and athletics. The reason was simple. Those two didn't help with ruling. They didn't help argue in courts or persuade in the Senate. And who did this system designed for ruling produce? One of its most famous products was the greatest emperor of Rome. Marcus Aurelius was born on April 26, 121 AD, into a wealthy aristocratic family in the city of Rome. He would become one of Rome's greatest emperors, the last of the 5 good emperors, a symbol of the Pax Romana era. But first and foremost, he was the perfect product of the Roman elite education system, trained from childhood to become a leader. At age 12, Marcus Aurelius began seriously studying Stoic philosophy, not as a hobby but as a way of life. His parents thought studying philosophy would prepare him for a political career, teaching him to control emotions and make wise decisions. But this 12-year-old boy did something that surprised his entire family, something no one expected from the future heir. He began wearing the Greek philosopher's cloak, the kind only poor philosophy followers wore, not Roman aristocrats. And he began sleeping on the cold bare floor like an ascetic monk, even though he had the softest bed in the empire and dozens of servants. His mother had to plead, "Son, at least sleep on a bed covered with skins, don't torture yourself like this." But Marcus only reluctantly agreed. The future emperor of Rome, the man who would rule the largest empire in the world, was living like a monk in his own palace. He had the best teachers money and power could buy. Junius Rusticus, Apollonius of Chalcedon, and Sextus of Chaeronea. All were leading Stoic philosophers of the era, respected not just for their knowledge, but for how they lived their lives. Junius Rusticus had the greatest influence on Marcus. He taught Marcus not to chase flowery rhetoric, but to focus on authenticity. He also introduced Marcus to the lectures of Epictetus, a Stoic philosopher who had been a slave, who completely transformed Marcus's thinking. And Marcus Aurelius loved his teachers so much that he did something no emperor before him had ever done for his teachers. He kept golden portraits of them in his private shrine, where he prayed daily, placing them equal to his ancestors and the gods. He personally visited their tombs after they died, a powerful emperor humbling himself before the graves of those who taught him how to live. In 161 AD, Marcus Aurelius became Roman emperor, beginning a reign that lasted nearly 20 years. He was called the Philosopher Emperor, not because he just read books, but because he genuinely tried to live according to what philosophy taught. But the most interesting thing about Marcus Aurelius wasn't his power, not his military victories or his legal reforms. It was the book he wrote, Meditations, a personal journal he never intended for anyone else to read. He wrote it for himself during long nights on the battlefield as a way to remind himself of Stoic philosophical principles. And in that book, the most powerful emperor in the world, ruling over 60 million people, wrote about an unexpected subject. He wrote about the impermanence of power, about how everything passes, about how even emperors are just dust in the flow of time. The perfect product of a system designed to train rulers was the one who most deeply questioned the very power that system gave him. This is the greatest irony of Roman education, and it raises a question we still need to answer today. Rome didn't build schools the way we understand them today. There was no universal education, no goal of everyone being educated. They built a system to train a ruling class, a sophisticated filtering machine to select those who would run the vast empire. And that system worked perfectly for its purpose, producing the best politicians, lawyers, and emperors the ancient world ever knew. This education system influenced how the West organized education for 2,000 years, from the Middle Ages to our own era. But when we praise Roman education as the foundation of civilization, we often forget to ask the most important question: what was education designed to do? To enlighten everyone, or to maintain the power of a few people chosen from the start? This isn't just a question for historians studying ancient Rome. It's a question we need to ask about our own systems. Rome answered that question clearly and without hiding it. Education was to maintain power, and it was designed precisely for that purpose. The question for us is, what do we want our education to do, and does its current design actually serve the purpose we claim? Because the design of any system always reflects its true purpose, whether we publicly acknowledge it or not.